without further ado, I will go ahead and give the floor to Randall.
Hello, and thanks again for coming out tonight. I'm Randall Hazelbaker. I'm one of the local historians here in town. It really started as collecting postcards of the area. I also had a pretty decent camera back in the early 70s, and it was right when urban renewal was happening in downtown Coldwater, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have the last photos of these buildings. And then I found out postcards have them too. But I did get pictures of buildings being torn down, and so that was really interesting. Now, I didn't know much about the state home, but in the 1970s, that's when they started tearing down a lot of the main administration building. And there was a gentleman out there who had been a patient, and that was, and his book is here, Richard Prangley, tried to save some of those buildings and turn it into kind of a mental health museum. Well, being owned by the state, the buildings needed a lot of work. There was asbestos involved, and so there was no money for it. But he did get the state historical marker out there, a two-sided historical marker, and that's all because of Richard Prangley. I did interview Richard Prangley later, right around the year 2000. So my postcard collection of just the state home is right here, and afterwards we'll have some time for questions and answers, and you can take a look at my collection. I get a lot of questions about the state home, a lot of questions about people who buy an old house. They want to know when it was built and who some of the owners were, but a lot of questions about the state home. And I think that's what happened also in our heritage room, was a lot of questions about the state home. If you're doing your family tree, and maybe not a direct line, but maybe your great-grandfather's brother was here, he died here, and yet there's no record of his burial, which is impossible when you're doing family tree stuff. Well, out at the state home, if you died and you were poor, there was a cemetery out there. It's still out there. It's called Palmackie Park, named after George Palmackie, who was a resident and who worked out there. So after a lot of questions and a lot of collecting, the board at the Heritage Room contacted me and said, how can we put together something that would help people with their questions about the state home? And so we decided at their board meeting that maybe a scrapbook would do. And so I put together a scrapbook, and I thought I could do it in one big scrapbook. You can't, it's two. So afterwards you can take a look at this, and this has all been digitized, so you can catch this on their website. And so the very first page pays homage to our own state senator, Caleb Randall from Coldwater. He got the state home to come here. We donated the 27 acres and approximately $25,000 in 1870s, which was a lot of money. But he was correct in that the building, the jobs, and it was the biggest employer for many years in Coldwater Branch County. So he did right, but we had to, there was a lot of other towns that wanted it, and we got it. So before the 1870s, you've probably heard of orphan trains. The very populated East Coast, if you were, this was interesting too, I think of an orphan as someone who's lost their mom and their dad, but you could be half orphaned. You just lose your mom or lose your dad, and the other spouse cannot handle the children anymore. And so you would go on a train, and it would come out west, and the train depots knew exactly when the orphan train would be there, and without any kind of background check, as we call them today, without any background check, you could pick and choose children to help on the farm. They thought that was kind of a bad idea, and so they came up with the original name of our state home was a state school. And what that was for was we were going to take these orphan children or neglected children. It didn't have to be an orphan. you could just be neglected by your parents, and we'd at least give you some schooling. So they kind of broke that up to a third of the day would be schoolwork, a third of the day would be recreation and entertainment, and then a third of the day would be learning work skills on how to work on a farm, or how to work downtown in a sewing shop or a shoe repair store. And so that's how they divvied up their time to get these kids. And the original kids were supposed to be from like 4 years old to 16. And then by the time you were 16-ish, it was time to, you're on your own kind of a thing. Today we call it 18 or older is when you're on your own. But back then in the 1870s, 16 was the time you went on your own. So I did these scrapbooks in chronological order, so that you could just kind of breeze through it and feel free. I put a lot of Caleb Randall quotes in it because he had a lot of great quotes about, this is our future, our children. It's today, it's the same thing. Our kids are the future, and we need to put time and effort and money towards them. Some of the things as a collector, I started with just postcards, and that leads to a lot of other things. Postcards led to memorabilia of our town and of our county, which would be cigar boxes, milk bottles, medicine bottles, ashtrays, thermometers. If it said Coldwater or if it was a Branch County town, I was interested in it. I got to know quite a few antique dealers. I had an antique booth myself, and when you hang out with other antique people, they're like, what do you collect? And so when they're at an auction and they're like, ooh, there was 3 Coldwater milk bottles, I bought them. And then, they'd have to make a little bit of money, that's okay, but I can't be at every auction and at every store. And so I had quite a few people looking for me. And back, in the 1970s and 80s, when I was collecting a lot of this stuff, prices were really reasonable. And they've gotten really not reasonable today for collecting this kind of stuff. Some of the odd pieces that I got, I thought this was really unusual. I bought this Coldwater State Home and Training School perspective of the physical plant. This book, I bought this at a book show, and this was probably just maybe 10, 15 years ago. This was when it was a prison, and in this book, it has schematics of every building, where the gas lines go in, where the water is, how the building was built, where the underground tunnels were to get to the next building for steam heat. And I just kind of thought, wow, this would be an important book for somebody who's doing time out there. Whatever happened to Frank? I don't know. He said something about getting the steam out of here. It's not too many steam jokes. I mentioned this book. The library does have this book, Waiting for Home. This is Richard Prangley, A True Story of Strength. He was from the Grand Rapids area, and our school was unique to Michigan. So somebody in Grand Rapids would come to Coldwater and drop off their kid. His story, it's kind of sad. It was in the 1950s. Richard Prangley had a hearing. As a baby, he had a hearing problem. They didn't know it. And so when it came time for talking and that kind of stuff, they were like, something's wrong with Richard. He wasn't talking like their other kids learned how to talk. And it was just a hearing thing, and nobody caught it. So they dropped him off here. They did visit him a few times, but he kind of was waiting to go home. And so it's kind of sad. He spent his life out there. And then when he turned 18, with the help of hearing aids and that kind of stuff, he could learn, and he has speech now. I'm not 100% sure if he's still alive or not today. But that was a really interesting story. I see we have Michigan History magazine here at the library. In 1977, Michigan History did an article about the Coldwater State Home, which is an excellent, excellent book. When they were tearing down some of those buildings, so it was 1970. I was still in high school in 1970. I was not roaming around buildings when they were tearing them down. I'd take a picture of them, but I did not roam and I'll say that in court if I have to. Here's a close-up of the administration building. Somebody gave me some of the cast iron top of it. And I was like, I don't want that, I'll take it. So this is out in my garden, and people are like, oh, that's clever, and I'm like, yeah, stay home. Some of the other things I found that was really interesting. The cottage style, so they had a huge, beautiful administration building, and they had cottages for these kids so that it seemed like a home. But the original cottages, built in the 1870s, had a small front porch. And that was because Italianates, that's what you had, was a small front porch. Well, all those front porches got replaced with huge front porches because open air was good for you, and it was just like a home. And so they had, one person was in charge of each cottage. And the facility out there had everything from, it had a water tower, it had their own water system, it had its own power plant out there. It was like a city upon its own. Now it started with 27 acres, but the state kept buying and more, and there was a dairy farm, I believe it was Fairview Dairy. They bought that when it came up for sale, and so it came with barns and dairy equipment. And they were trying to make their own little city out there. And I think it swelled to, in 1960, there was almost 3,000 residents out there, which the population of Coldwater is 10. So 3,000 residents were out there. Some of the other things that were kind of interesting was by 1992 it closed in 1992. And what had happened was it started as an orphanage or neglected children. Well, the healthy kids were immediately adopted into foster homes to help out on the farm. The kids that had slight problems, bad elbow, a crooked knee, those kids never got picked up. And what was happening was the healthy kids were coming and going, and the kids with problems stayed. And it just kind of morphed into more of a medical facility instead of just an orphanage. So that was a total change. They totally took the healthy orphaned kids and neglected kids to Ann Arbor, Michigan, to a facility there, and they changed the name to the regional center, and that's when this was, and they would take any age child now, from baby to 80 years old. They would take anybody at that point, and so it just changed. And so, but with attitudes and modern medicine, all of a sudden, say if you had a child with Down syndrome, all of a sudden you would just raise it yourself in your own house, in your own home. The days of dropping your child off to an institution, those days were over. Medicine and attitude, all of a sudden, these kids had a chance at home. Now, we also have group homes, and we still do to this day, group homes for people. And then ADAPT is just celebrating their 50th anniversary, ADAPT. And they take on projects and jobs from some of the local factories, easy jobs that need to be done. And the ADAPT people can do that and they make money for doing that. So that's it in a nutshell. It's still out there today. They keep tearing down more and more buildings. The one that just got torn down not too long ago near the soccer fields, I love the soccer fields, was the hospital. The hospital was put in the mid-1950s, and it was a state-of-the-art hospital. Now, I don't know how true this is, but if you were to get into a really bad car accident right here, there's a chance that they would take you to the state hospital at the state home as opposed to our hospital if you were in really bad shape, because they had the up-to-date modern equipment. So now, unfortunately, it's all been disintegrated and now it's gone, but in the 50s, they had the best equipment possible. They had lots of entertainment out there. Even the townsfolk were invited out there. A lot of people have stories of on the weekend you could take a resident and they would come to your house under your supervision, and they would help you with yard work, or they would help you clean your house. So there's a lot of stories about like that. Now, I worked for a local company, Q1 Video, and we did local TV. And in the late 90s, it closed in 92. In the late 90s, early 2000s, I did a bunch of interviews and put them on TV, and I would interview people what they did for the state home, when they worked there, what their job was, and that kind of stuff. These interviews are now going to be digitized, and they'll be on the library's website as they digitize all these interviews. Now, of these interviews, I got to meet, his name was Kenneth Klein. I know 3 people with that name. This is one of them. This one was in the 1990s, he was in his 90s. And he lived really close to me. I live on Waterman. He lived on North Clay in an apartment. And as I was interviewing these people who used to work there, they're like, you need to meet Kenneth Klein, and so I did. And he had 16 millimeter black and white footage out there. And I said, ooh, there's modern technology. If you'd let me borrow this film, it was a lot. I'll have it digitized and put on a CD. And he said, well, I've got a projector. It's like, what? What's a projector? I knew what a projector was, but he had like a 1930s projector. And so I felt like I was in 5th grade all over again today. I got it. You know. Anyways, I had a digital video camera with a television monitor. We found a blank wall on in his apartment. I put a microphone on. And I said, just tell me what we're looking at. And so I could see the image on the wall, and I could see the image on the TV, and being digitized, it was a better quality picture on the television. And he had his mic on saying, this is Frank Smith, he was in charge of the power plant. And so I ended up putting that on TV, on local TV. And so that was amazing. He also had a photograph collection. He was in charge of athletics and gymnastics and that kind of stuff. And he gave me a huge book of black and white photographs and said, do you want this? If my wife finds out, to this day, she does not know about the book. Also, another person who had a collection of photographs, including the negatives, was Leroy Harris, who lived on Grand Street. I never met him, but I met his daughter, and she heard about my interviews and said, do you want all these negatives and photographs of, I said, yes, I do. And so that was really wonderful too. So that's it in a nutshell. So Caleb Randall, his house no longer exists. It was out on East Chicago Street. There's a little tiny chiropractor building there. It turned into an apartment, and there was a fire. But it's where you go for your chiropractic. Dr. Hatt's office. So there's all these beautiful old houses, and then there's this little weird little, and then beautiful old houses. That's where Caleb Randall lived, and that's why the parking lot right by Gillespie Funeral Home is called Randall Plaza. It was named after me. It was Caleb Randall. Anyways, so that's kind of neat. So the collection continues. I still collect stuff. I know people who work out at the prison, and they're like, Randall, do you got any Lakeland Correctional Facility money? I'm like, say what? And so I got some money, and the prisoners at one time, they didn't anymore, but at one time you could earn money to buy cigarettes or,
Candy
pop, candy, yeah. Anyway, so I got some of these, and I said, what happened to them all? And they're like, man, we threw them all away because we don't use them anymore. So I got some of those. I still find stuff there's postcard shows. I can still find some things at postcard shows, so that's always good for the collection. the really nice stuff is the drawings of before photographs. This is from Branch County's 1878 history of Branch County. Here's a beautiful drawing of this building, of the buildings, and it shows the administration building and then these cottages. And then the power plant, it was before their water tower, but it was just really ingenious of to have their own facility. It was like their own little city out there. And it was a great boom for this town and this county. I know my mom used to work at Penny's, and the state home would come in and just buy hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of underwear, socks, shirts. It was just good. It was good business, very good business. So in the future, we have digitized the scrapbooks. We're going to digitize these interviews, but they also want to set up a recording device in there so that if anyone comes in there and says, "Oh, the state home, I used to work there. Really, can we put a microphone on you and tell us your story?" Because it's this, for Coldwater and Branch County, the state home is a huge facility that we cannot ignore. Even though it's closed and you can't see it anymore, now there's a prison there. It's still, the history of it is stellar. It's amazing what we have. So that's kind of a neat future to record more oral histories of what we used to have, because slowly but surely the oral histories are going away. So I will take any questions at this point, but not from you. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. No, go ahead.
So, I worked there for 24 years,
Oh,
and you've got me on that tape because you had me down in Q1 video.
okay.
So, I was there 24 years, and I was one of 4 of the last people to walk out of there and hand the keys over to corrections.
Wow.
So, a couple of things to add to your program tonight. It was originally called Michigan Children's Village, and then it changed as it went down the line. So, and also the cemetery. My understanding is that they actually transferred those graves somewhere else.
Do we know where?
That I do not know.
Because, it should have been maybe Oak Grove, but I know it's not Oak Grove.
But that's my understanding in all the years that I worked, and I was in administration at the last, so we did know some of those histories. Also, all the records went to Lansing, so if people are doing their genealogy, they have to go up there and prove that they are a family member and that to be able to get those records.
Yeah, that sounds a lot better than to think that they're still there.
Now, no.
Okay, I feel better now, right? I can go home and sleep.
And there was a building out there that was named Randall Hall after Mr. Randall.
Yeah.
It was one of the higher functioning girls units, and it was really nice buildings.
Is it still standing?
No, that was one it was over by the schoolhouse.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
And I know some people who worked at Evergreen, which was one of the schools.
Evergreen School.
Yeah, and that had a pool in it, and I thought, that's nice, an indoor pool, but.
I swim.
Okay.
Oh, cool.
Okay. One of the things that was kind of neat was at some point towards the end, they did add the hydraulic floor in it, so that, and I thought, wow, that's classy. So you could bring it up and you could walk around in it, and then for the kids who could swim, they'd go ahead and let it back down. I thought that was ingenious.
And to add to the hospital story, there was a morgue there that they did, and it was very well used. I think
Alberton Hospital.
Yeah.
They did autopsies and stuff.
And was it, for my knowledge, it was more high tech than our local hospital, would you say?
I don't know.
It was hard, we just thought it was well, the hospital was a great unit.
There's a nurse, she would know.
Very well used,
Nice. And then we talked briefly earlier about the bell. So there was a bell out there put in the administration building in the 1870s, and that bell let everyone know, 7 bells meant get up, 12 bells meant lunch, 5 bells meant dinner, and then 1 bell meant lights out. Well, then as everyone had clocks and watches, it was like we didn't need the bell anymore. And so the bell rotted on top of the administration building. And at some point, it was time to take it down. And so they got a machine and took that bell off, and some other facility in Michigan kind of wanted it. I think it was a campground up north. And they just wanted to ring it for the campers. Well, when Mr. Klein, I want to say Ken Klein's dad.
Homer John Klein?
Yeah, thank you. She's part of the thing too. He found out where it went and said, hey, that's our bell. And they're like, you can have it back if you want it, because they just would ring it to tell the campers get out or time to eat or whatever. And so he had it returned, and they made a little brick. This was in George Pelmackey Park, and so it sat out there. Well, then once it became a prison, we realized, well, the prison didn't want the bell, and so the county stored the bell at the old jail out here, the annex, and so it was upstairs. And so I saw it a few times up there, and then there was enough interest in that bell that we brought it down. And now, right now, if you went into the courthouse, they're closed. If you went into the courthouse, right in the foyer, the bell sits. And we would like to either build something to protect it and either put it on the courthouse lawn or quite possibly the four corners. In a perfect world, it would be nice to put it out there, but we don't know what's going to happen. There's only one prison out there now and a lot of land, and we don't know what's going to happen out there. So we'd hate to put it back where it should really be if it's going to be something else.
So the inscription on the bell, who put the inscription on the bell?
I'm not sure, but it was done when it was out for George Pelmackey. But I know you repeated it. It's really nice. It's something about.
It's about justice and healing for our city.
Yeah.
I think that was.
I might have that information in there.
Yeah.
I'll look afterwards.
I
might have it.
It's still on the bell.
I understand if they put it in the courthouse and they put the justice on there.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in the healing for the city. What stirred that thought process?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
I'm just curious how many people here worked out there.
Raise your hand if you worked out there. Okay. 3 people. We're gonna need interviews from you afterwards.
Yeah, I have.
On
lots of
camera, so you
stories
better be
right
back.
Yeah, and
Can't
you know, we did have some people who said, I've got some stories and I can't tell you some of them.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, that's kind of sad. Yes.
Isn't there a pretty easy way to find out whether those people are still buried there?
Like with a metal detector or something, you mean?
I mean, don't they usually have grave markers and,
The markers
Well-
broke off.
I mean, but underneath
Yeah.
the ground, there's like sometimes there's a metal thing. They had one
A
over
marker.
in,
I don't think they do
Sturgis
out there.
At the gravesite on 12.
yeah, they did, the ladies went in and dug and
Oh.
found those, and then they found the records of the courthouse
Yeah.
that corresponded with like a number on the little metal thing.
Okay. You mean at Mason, that cemetery that they found there, you mean?
No,
Over
it's-
between Brunson and Sturgis.
Oh.
Before you get to the old folks farm.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
It
okay.
used to be for
A poorhouse.
poorhouse.
Yeah.
State Farm.
I know, and I told people, and like you tell people to go to Lansing, because Lansing does have records of who was there, but I'm not sure, like we talked about, I hope they're not still out there. But to my knowledge, I have a book called Burials in Branch County, and they're not listed.
I know.
So I don't know. It's a very good question. Yes.
I have 4 relatives that work there that I'm aware of, including my father. And as far as the pool goes, when I was in 4th grade at that time in Coldwater,
Mm.
they would bring us by bus to the, we'd have like a swimming lesson there. And that was we wouldn't go to Heritage Pool because it was outside, obviously.
Right.
But yeah, we would go there and swim and learn different things.
The
Wow.
floor going up and down too, you could put wheelchairs.
Yeah.
Oh,
on
you
that.
could
So,
wheel in and,
yeah.
And then they filled it in and we couldn't go there with our kids anymore because they didn't want the prisoners to have more than we did.
oh, so they filled it
They
in.
filled it in.
Yeah.
So is everything else there though?
I have no clue. Yeah, I think it sounded like they just went and filled it in so nobody could use it. It was such a nice thing to take our fourth graders there so they could
Yeah.
swim.
Yeah.
And then we had to go to Sturgis and Marshall and Angola and Hillsdale. That was nuts.
Hmm.
But they learned how to swim at fourth grade.
And they could use it for rehab too.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And they
yeah.
had it open on Sundays. You could pay like $1 and go in and swim.
Oh, wow. Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yes.
Have you done research into the connection with like the different poor farms and poor houses that sent kids here?
There is a list of where everyone came from, and I saw that list, and it's mainly Michigan, so, but Branch County had a poor home too, really
Right.
close to Maple Lawn, which
Yeah.
was the jail, which is now not, but I don't know, the poor farm, that was the thing, was you could live there for free, but you helped raise food.
You
So
worked on
I'm
the
not
farm,
sure,
right.
when you're a kid, it's limited what you could do. But I know in that list, it tells where they were from, and I'm not sure, I think every county had a poor farm.
Yeah, well, I just say that because I know the Van Buren County Poorhouse still stands as a museum, and I know several people who were like intakes as like 6, 7-year-olds, and they were pretty much like a couple weeks later sent here.
Oh, wow, they were
Because they
sent
didn't
here.
keep kids there at the
Right,
poorhouse.
right,
So
right,
they were
right.
sent to the state school.
Wow, that's interesting. Yes,
So I've got 2 questions. First one, was it ever like a gated community? When it was an orphanage, any fencing or,
no,
it was just an open.
There
It was
was
all
never
open.
any fencing around there at all.
And then
yeah,
as it transitioned into more of a mental and physical,
Still no fencing.
Not till the prison.
Not till the prison came.
Boy, and then-
Weren't there signs on the edge of town not to pick up people? Because they
Yeah.
would wander away?
right, like hitchhikers,
Yeah.
don't pick up hitchhikers because of
Because
the,
they would wander away and
yeah.
pick up.
But I've heard a lot of stories of people who would pick the same person up every week, and they would do laundry and, and they got paid. That's really interesting.
John said his dad owned property and they would, pick up a few kids.
Yeah, a couple of kids
To help,
Mm-hmm.
go in and clean up, paint, do yard work like you said.
yeah.
I remember that.
Mm.
I remember a couple of them were quite characters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
my second question.
Oh, no, you're on number 3 now.
You can't count.
As it transitioned from the orphanage into more of a mental and facility, was that people from all over the state?
Yeah.
Were you deemed like a ward of the state? What got you there? What got you out?
Well, we were the only facility like that per se. So like I said, Richard Prangley in the 1950s came from Grand Rapids to Coldwater. His family took him, so I think you go to your physician and there's like something's wrong with Richard, and they're like, well, there's this place in Coldwater that's an institution that could help him. So, but I think it had to be in Michigan. It was a Michigan thing.
Like were criminals sent that, that may have been,
No.
deemed.
Then you'd have fencing.
But, as far as, that might have been deemed insane or, any kind of.
Well, when it went to the geriatric mentally ill, those were, patients from all over the state, not out of state. But it was, like they have Kalamazoo Regional now, but, yeah, it was developmentally disabled. And then later, they did we become a psychiatric hospital, but that was basically for the older elderly
Right.
geriatric population that came from all over the state, because then that was the focus for that for a while. And then it became the prison, and all those people were sent elsewhere.
And, you know, we know other towns had different, kind of facilities like this, but specifically different things. We started as an orphanage and more. Yes?
My dad, excuse me, my dad was born in 1933 and in Waterville, Michigan. And, you know, during the Depression, his family was very poor. And so the four of the brothers got sent there when it was an orphanage.
Yeah.
I thought it was an orphanage. I've been doing ancestry on my daddy, and I have the 1950 census, and it's Coldwater State Home and Training School.
Yeah.
In 1950. Of course, he came he was only
40s.
like 4 when he was there. He was the youngest of those 4 brothers.
Mm.
And it's interesting because on this census, his occupation is inmate. So, and then it also says that, I hate this word, but it says that he was an imbecile.
They used the terms imbecile, moron, where there was some, I can't remember, but they were actually what they used to define them, or
Fits.
characterize
They
them.
had,
But they were just poor.
yeah.
They
They were just
meant to
poor.
have
That's the way
handicap.
they were.
Oh.
People were, it was terrible.
Awful.
Yeah,
Mm.
terrible.
Yeah, well, and
Looks like
then,
he turned out fun.
Yes,
Yes,
he
he
did.
Well, thank you.
well, and I think those terms were legit at the time, and then the public heard about them, and then they called everybody the same thing, you know, a moron, or, you know, but retardation.
Low grade,
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe that's the justice and healing for the city,
I think.
yeah,
because that, it's, as it's spoken, carries on to the generations if it's not dealt with appropriately.
yeah.
So
I think
that could be why they wrote that.
Maplewood has some of the same thing when it was a poor farm, and the books are there, and there, it lists the people and, you know, where they were from, and it was like a diagnosis column, only it was, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
I understood that after it closed, some of the people were just kind of let go.
Yeah.
And we had them, you know, we owned a
Because-
business in the early 2000s and we had special.
Yeah, the
people that
whole,
came
the
in.
whole idea was that the state had funds going out there, and then it was up to the counties to take care of them. So they were sent back to the county, and the money was supposed to be filtered back to the counties to care for those people, which it didn't happen.
So they just ended up living in town.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a nice idea.
And in the prison system, which they were misdiagnosed, or they were called dual diagnosed, and they become prisoners and they didn't get the help that they needed.
Mm.
There's a lot of that. Because the people then, they were roaming in the towns and getting into trouble because they didn't have people to help them.
Yeah.
And the support groups, yeah.
Mm.
And then really getting taken advantage of.
Yep,
like,
they did.
required.
So when we were told that it's gonna be closed, of course, we all got up in arms and we had a big protest and all that. But we did a hands around the regional center. And we had enough people that came out that day and we all joined hands. Did you? Were you part of that? Yeah, it's been a long time ago,
I'm not gonna
right?
say we have to look at it.
But yeah, so we did a hands around the regional center to try to keep it open. Because they had just put all this money into the cottages to
Yeah.
upgrade them.
Yeah.
They were like apartments, they were beautiful,
Mm.
and it was wonderful. And there was 8 residents on each side and elevators and their own kitchens and all that.
Wow.
So, we're going, wait a minute, we've got really good care here, we had really good people that worked out there,
Mm.
but no, it was totally difficult.
Wow. That's too bad. Anything else? Well, thanks again for coming out. Feel free to take a look at some of this stuff.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good conversation too.
Yeah.